Last week, I was at Africa Fashion Week London, and during the press conference, I met this mum and a daughter. The mum was 62, so she's a boomer woman. And I've thought about them over the last week or so because there was a seed that was planted, particularly in the mum, the boomer woman, which was reignited. So she's been a practicing nurse for the last 30 odd years, but she has held on to her dream of being a fashion designer. And her daughter did something really beautiful. She brought her along to the press conference so that her mum could be re-engaged, re-immersed, reawakened to the dream that she has held on to for more than 30 years. And over the last 30 years, she couldn't pursue the idea of becoming a fashion designer because the realities of life were knocking very loudly at her door. And so she moved into nursing. But there was a spark that was ignited in her eyes. And I want you to think of, as a boomer woman, I want you to sit with it, with this idea that beyond the roles that you have adopted, adapted, lived into for more than 3 decades, I'm sure you have your own version of being the fashion designer that this mum at 62 years old, let's remove the tag of her being a mum, this boomer woman who's blossoming into the third act of her life, wants to re-engage with. And so in today's show, I want to tease out some of those ideas that can help you reframe and look at what can 30 years actually look like and how could you utilize some of the backstories within the 30 years to create leverage that moves you forward. So there was a famous copywriter called Victor Schwab, and he had a way of identifying human desire. Just as 62-year-old boomer who has this burning desire to be a fashion designer, Schwab, back in the 50s, 60s, his work really did outline what can human desire actually look like. So human desire can be framed as we want to gain something, we want to be something, we want to give something, and we may want to save something. So under every human decision that we take, consciously or otherwise, there's this framework that underpins it. Alongside human desire, I want us to kind of explore what 30 years can look like through an astrological lens, particularly the planet Saturn. And I'm mentioning this because Saturn, in astrology, there is the sense of the Lord of time, leadership, the teacher, the disciplinarian. But I actually want us to explore Saturn as the keeper of time. And there are some cycles that Saturn repeats, that wherever Saturn is in your birth chart, it returns back to that point every 30 years. So I was born in 1963. So between the years of 1962 to 1964, those of us born within that frame of reference, we have Saturn in Aquarius. And as we were approaching 28, 29, 30, Saturn was returning back to that place. And so what it does, it caps 30 years and then opens up 30 years. And when we experience our first Saturn return, and as boomer women, we can look back to the first and the second, which I'm going to come to in a moment. But when we look back at our first Saturn return, the questions that Saturn, the first time round, is asking us to address, given that we are maturing into young adulthood, is the identity and the values that we were living with at that period of time. Were they the identity and the values that were given to us from society, family, ethnicity, culture, and religion? Because invariably what we can find is that as we are navigating towards the mature end of young adulthood, who are we? We may not have answered that question fully. And whether you believe in astrology or not, what I'm seeking to do is to use Saturn's benchmarks from 30 years into another 30 years to show an arc of growth. So they are the first two questions that the first Saturn return asks of us. The second Saturn return that runs from 30 through to 58, 59, 60, 61-ish is the identity of the second Saturn return. What did we build? Who did we become? What identity did we choose? Did we live authentically? And for the millions of boomer women across the world, it could be that question that nudges you in those quiet moments of mature reflection. And what tends to happen to us as women in particular is that we have absorbed the roles that other people felt that we were good enough for. That could be caregiver, and that could be caregiver to children or family or to your spouse or to your long-term partner or to community or to work or to your religious or spiritual communities. There are roles that women tend to have absorbed, and in the absorption of it or of them, there's been a suppression or a denial or a partial erasure of those long-held dreams. So looking at the use of Saturn is a great way, and it's a portal for us to open the gates to what can 30 years look like. And it's a very conscious decision once you do it, because Saturn, astrologically, it gives you benchmarks of 30 years. But our own evolution may fall within, the specific timeframes, or it might take us more time to mature to get into it. So let's just go back to Schwab's 4 ideas about becoming. So for this wonderful nurse at 62 years old, who I met last week, who is tasting the idea of being a fashion designer. And one of the reasons why her daughter brought her there was because she was dropped into the environment of other fashion designers, but of color and couture and design and dreams that are being realized, because you had designers from right across the African continent who were being showcased during this press release. But if we apply the 4 markers, according to Schwab, in terms of human decision-making and desire, what could this 62-year-old boomer want? Well, maybe she wanted to gain recognition, creative expression. Maybe she wanted income. What did she want to become? Maybe she wanted to be a designer, a fashion designer, birthing her ideas, bringing them into the world. What did she want to give? Well, she wanted to give her energy in a way that was meaningful to her own life, as opposed to always giving her energy to caregiving. So what does she want to be? What does she want to do? She wanted to establish her ideas. She wants recognition. And when we are thinking about reinvention, there are so many different avatars that we can lean into, that are avatars we choose, as opposed to the avatars that other people placed upon us. So staying with this nurse of 62 years old and comparing the decision-making process plus what was handed to her, well, she took on roles. She was a caregiver. She was a nurse. So she took on the roles that were always feeding into other people's peace of mind, caring for others. But in doing so, what did she sacrifice and what did she deny in terms of her own dreams? And you might be a woman who's 58, 60, 62, who's standing at the thresholds, just like this 62-year-old boomer who I met last week during the press conference. You're standing at the thresholds with this shape, this container that is asking of you, what did you build? What did you become? Did you do it authentically? And they are questions and answers that you can ruminate on, but they are the types of questions, and whatever answers you get from them can begin to be the backstories, these multiple backstories that are running at the back of your mind, but are driving the decisions you make and the decisions that you decide you're not going to move forward with. So we've got Schwab in terms of human decision making. We've got astrology using Saturn. Whether you believe in astrology or not, what I'm seeking to do here is to show you the framework of how you can explore 30-year periods, so it brings meaning to you. And then the third layer, as I am intimate with astrology, I'm also intimate with Jungian analytic theory, because I did a master's in Jungian analytic theory and completed that 34 years ago. Long time, yeah, it was 2002. And the central tenet that runs through Jungian theory is this idea of individuation. Now, no doubt you've come across loads of videos on YouTube that are loosely using Jungian ideas. And one of them that you might come across is the kind of healthy, the healthy carer. It's the person who has absorbed all the lessons and then is just this healthy version of themselves. And that's not quite what he taught. What Jung taught, and what his theories are based on, is this journey of individuation. And so with all the different roles that we have lived into, we've populated, they are the roles that the external world has given us. And the journey of individuation is the journey of maturing and becoming an outsider to those roles that were handed to you and you absorbed. So you're now outside of those roles and you are choosing the path of integration. You're choosing the path of wholeness. You're choosing the path of completeness, which means you're no longer relying on being valued or taking on the value of the outside world. And you're no longer on the journey of proving your worth. They are central tenets within Jungian analytic theory. It's the journey to becoming. Now, the journey to becoming might not be one that arrives neatly within these goalposts of, we've got our first Saturn return, second Saturn return, and if we're blessed, we'll have a third Saturn return as we're approaching our late 80s into our 90s. So astrology can give you these benchmarks. But I actually studied, I did my master's, I was 39 years old. 38, 39 years old when I started my master's, which was beyond my first Saturn return, nearly a decade on. But I arrived at it with real hard data as to lived experiences. And I also knew, and I was pulled towards, there's a deeper framework than the surface level through the experiences that we just live. Life happens to us, we happen to it. I fought the world, it fought me. And this Jungian analytic theory was a way to explore my internal world and to bring out the depth and the nuance and the identities that populate my internal world and how I could connect with those and not reject any of them, and so that I could live more wholesomely. And so when we're looking back at periods of 30 years, and those of us boomer women who are in our 60s or 70s, we can look back over the arc of the first 30 years that brought us to 28 to 30, 31, to the second 30 years, and to ask those pointed questions of ourselves. What does it all mean? And by asking these questions, by posing these questions, it gives us depth, it gives us nuance. But I love this idea, and it's something that I live outside the lens of other people. And it's a really powerful place to be, because it's about who I have chosen to be and what I have rejected in terms of labels. I was never really a labels person myself, even from when I was knee high, or certainly in my pubescent, going through adolescence. There was a sense of identity. But obviously, when I was a teenager, I couldn't name it definitively. But I can look back over 63 years, and I would say maybe 58 of them consciously, like memory-wise. And I think the more of us that step into the rejection of the labels, so that we can be outside the labels, having lived through them, but we're in a position because we've continued to explore and deep dive and excavate and bring to the surface and integrate. So we're now outside of the roles that have been foisted onto us, ones we may have unconsciously walked into, ones we may have settled into. We're now the outsider looking in, looking back, but we are now in the position of leadership to look where we currently are and where we could go. And that is the beauty of exploring the terrain of what could 30 years look like, and then bring a level of examination to all of it, so that you can begin to explore backstories. As I mentioned in the yesterday's video, it's around backstories, and are they time bombs? They are if they remain unconscious, and they become leverage when we become the outsider looking back, looking into the roles we have performed. And if we go back to the boomer who has a desire to be a fashion designer, a way to understand this is she has lived through a world of caring, and we all have in one form or another. But when we step into this level of ownership over who we are, we stop losing ourselves in the role of caring and being the carer. Because what can happen is that in the busyness of caring, it then protects us from looking into our own worlds. But if we're on the path of individuation, and it just doesn't arrive abruptly, it's not like, okay, on, the 3rd of September, I'm individuated. Not at all. It's a lifelong process that you keep integrating. But the separation comes when you are no longer doing the caring role, and you're no longer disappearing into the caring role, but you are now the outsider observing the caring role, and then being able to put limits around what that now means as you move into this third act of living. So that brings us to the end of today's show. This sense of, how do you mark the two phases of 30 years in your life? Where could you begin with all of that? Well, you can download my free audio guide, which helps you think about the gold mines that live within these backstories that you might want to bring to the surface, begin gently teasing through. They can also be an additional frame through which you are looking at the 30 years. Which elements are you looking at it from the point of view? You've always been the carer. You've always just absorbed the roles. And that's another thing. When you're on the path of individuation, you're no longer absorbing. You're refuting. You're refuting what once was, and you are self-determining what is and what's coming. So feel free to download my free audio guide to help you tease through those ideas. And I would love to hear, how do you frame what's your path into, or how are you now going to start exploring those two sets of 30 years through the lens of the Saturnian time, and the 30 years that brought you to 60. Did you do it authentically, truly? What did you build? Now, that could be something tangible in the outside world, or it could be this juicy journey of individuation, that you've built this level of solidity, integration within your internal world. And if you step back to the days of when you were 28, leaving your 20s into your 30s, who you were and the values you lived with, do you still live with them? Or have you reneged them? I'd love to hear. Put your comments in the comment box below. Don't be shy. I'm a real person. Look, I'm a real person that would love to be in conversation with you. And stay well. And I will see you again on the next show. Stay well. Bye.